The wind was a blade, sharp enough to peel the bark from the pines. Elias felt it in the bones of his face, a familiar cruelty that matched the one in his soul. Snow fell not in flakes but in a blinding sheet, a shroud over a dead world. He was checking the north fence line, a ritual of defiance against the season's siege. His horse, Gideon, snorted clouds of steam, patient in the lee of a granite outcrop. It was by the outcrop that he saw it, a shape that did not belong, a stain of darker ruin against the white, a broken wagon, one will splintered into a prayer of surrender, canvas torn and flapping like a wounded bird. He approached with the slow caution of a man who knew the wilderness rarely offered gifts, only traps. There was no sound but the wind's howl and the creak of his saddle. He dismounted, rifle held loose but ready. The cold was a physical weight pressing down, silencing everything. He pulled back the ripped canvas flap. The smell hit him first, iron and fear. Inside, huddled in a nest of threadbare blankets, was a woman. Her face was a ruin of purple and blue, one eye swollen shut, her lips split clean to the gum. She was barely conscious, her breath a shallow, rattling thing. And curled against her, small and still as a fawn hiding from a wolf, was a girl. The child couldn't have been more than 5. Her eyes, wide and dark in a pale face, were fixed on him. They were not the eyes of a child. They were old, ancient with a terror that had burned away everything else. They held no tears, no plea, only a silent, bottomless watchfulness. The woman stirred, a low moan escaping her broken lips. She tried to pull the child closer, a purely instinctual act of a mother shielding her young. Elias saw the fresh blood on the blankets then, the source of the iron scent. He saw the way the woman's body was twisted in pain. He had seen death in 100 forms on battlefields that had stolen his name and replaced it with a number. He knew its patient shadow. It was in this wagon. He holstered his rifle. His voice was rust, and used for anything but curses and commands to his horse. "Ma'am," the woman flinched, a violent tremor, her one good eye flying open with raw panic. He saw himself reflected in it, a large, bearded shape blocking the light, a threat. He held up his hands, gloved and clumsy. "I mean no harm," the words were stones in his throat. The girl did not move, did not blink. She just watched. He looked around the desolate wagon.
No provisions.
No fire. The tracks leading to this place were almost entirely erased by the storm. They had been here for a day, maybe more. To leave them was to sign their death warrant. To take them was to invite the world back into the fortress of his grief, a place he had built stone by painful stone. He looked at the woman, whose fight was draining out of her with every ragged breath. He looked at the child, who had already seen too much of that fight. He thought of 2 small mounds of earth behind his cabin, marked by simple wooden crosses. A wife, a daughter, lost not to a blizzard, but to a fever the doctors had no name for. The emptiness of his cabin echoed in his ears, a silence louder than the wind. He could not leave them. It wasn't a choice made of goodness, but of a hollow man seeing a reflection of his own ruin. He knelt. The floorboards of the wagon creaked. "The storm's not letting up. You'll die here." His words were not gentle. They were harsh, factual. A diagnosis. The woman shook her head, a small, desperate motion. "No, Hill." Her voice was a cracked whisper. The word hung in the frozen air. The cause of the ruin on her face. The reason for the terror in her daughter's eyes. Elias understood. This was not misfortune. This was an escape. Failed one. "He ain't here now," Elias stated. "I am." He reached for her, and she recoiled with a strangled cry, a sound that pierced the numbness he'd curated for 3 years. He stopped, his hand hovering in the space between them. He saw the terror not just of him, but of any man, of any touch. His jaw tightened. He looked at the silent child, whose gaze was a physical weight. He had to break through the fear or it would kill them all. He made his decision. It was brutal, but so was the world. He leaned in close, his voice low and hard, a rasp of gravel and iron. It was not a request. It was a command forged in desperation. I'm taking you. You're coming with me. He didn't wait for an answer. He gathered the woman in his arms. She was light, fragile as a bird. She gave a single, broken sob, and then went limp, whether from surrender or unconsciousness, he couldn't tell. He carried her to his horse, settling her in front of him on the saddle. He went back for the child. She hadn't moved. She just stared at the empty space where her mother had been. You too, he grunted, the words feeling foreign and heavy. He lifted her. She was stiff, unyielding, but she did not fight him. He placed her behind him, her small, cold hands clutching the back of his coat with a surprising strength. He wrapped his own blanket around them all and urged Gideon forward, away from the broken wagon and into the teeth of the storm, 3 broken souls against the white oblivion. The cabin was a single room, built of thick pine logs hewn by his own hands. It was sparse, clean, a monk's cell against the wilderness. A stone hearth dominated one wall, its embers glowing faintly. A bed, a table, 2 chairs. That was all. He laid the woman, Lena, as he would later learn she was called, on his bed. The child, Alara, stood by the door, a tiny, frozen sentinel, her eyes tracking his every move. He stoked the fire, coaxing it back to roaring life. The flames threw dancing shadows on the walls, a sudden, violent life in the quiet room. The warmth began to push back the bone-deep cold. He brought a basin of hot water and a cloth to the bedside. He hesitated. He had tended to men in the war, their bodies torn by shot and steel. This felt different, more intimate, a greater violation. He touched the cloth to her forehead, gently wiping away the grime and a fleck of dried blood. She didn't stir. He cleaned her wounds with a practiced, detached efficiency, his hands steady despite the tremor in his gut. Her body was a map of cruelty. Old scars, yellowing bruises, and the fresh, raw marks of a recent and terrible violence. He found the source of the bleeding, a deep, ugly gash on her side, clumsily stitched with coarse thread. It was infected. He swore under his breath, a low, vicious sound. He would have to open it, clean it, stitch it properly. He found his supplies, a small leather pouch with needles, gut, and a bottle of whiskey. He poured some of the liquor onto a clean rag. The sharp, sterile smell filled the cabin. He looked over at the girl. She was still by the door, watching. Her silence was more unnerving than any scream. "Go sit by the fire," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She didn't move. He sighed, turning back to the task. He woke the woman gently.
Mom.
Lena, her good eye fluttered open. It was clouded with pain and confusion. "I have to clean this wound on your side. It's going to hurt." Fear flashed across her face, raw and immediate. She tried to sit up, to push him away. "No, please." He placed a firm hand on her shoulder, holding her down, not with anger, but with an unmovable weight. "It has to be done, or the fever will take you." He held out a strip of leather. "Bite on this." She stared at it, then at him, her breathing quickening. In her eyes, he saw not a healer, but another man who would cause her pain. The thought was a hot brand on his conscience. He saw the child take a single step away from the door, her hands clenched into tiny fists. He changed his approach. He took the leather away. He met the woman's terrified gaze. "I will be as quick as I can," he said, his voice flat. "I promise." It was the first promise he'd made to another living soul in 3 years. He worked quickly, his movements precise. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore through the cabin. The child flinched as if struck, but did not make a sound. Lena's fingers dug into the mattress, her body arching in agony. And then it was over. He stitched the wound with neat, tight sutures, his past life as a field medic rising from its grave. He bandaged it tightly. She was slick with sweat, trembling, her face pale as bone. She had passed out again. He covered her with a thick wool blanket and sat in the chair by the fire, the whiskey bottle in his hand. He didn't drink. He just stared into the flames, the woman's scream echoing in the silence. The days that followed were measured in silence and routine. Elias would rise before dawn, tend to the fire, check on his few animals, and hunt. He would leave food on the table, a bowl of stew, a piece of bread, and retreat into his work, splitting wood, mending tack, reinforcing the cabin against the relentless winter. He moved with a purpose that kept the ghosts at bay. Lena recovered slowly. She rarely left the bed at first, her body healing in small, painful increments. She would watch him, her gaze wary, calculating. She ate the food he left, her movements furtive, like a stray animal learning to trust a hand that feeds. She never spoke. Neither did the child. Alara was her mother's shadow. Where Lena went, she followed. From the bed to the chair by the fire, from the chair to the small window that looked out on the endless white. They were two parts of a whole, a silent pact of survival. The cabin was thick with unspoken things. The air was heavy with his grief and their fear. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he would hear Lena crying, soft, muffled sobs that she thought he couldn't hear. He would lie on his makeshift bed of pelts by the hearth, staring at the ceiling, the sound twisting in his gut. It was the sound of his own wife's weeping when the fever took their Sarah. He did not comfort her. He didn't know how. The words of solace had died in him long ago. Instead, he would get up and put another log on the fire, a clumsy, silent offering of warmth against the cold of her sorrow. One afternoon, he came in from the cold to find Lena mending one of his shirts. The needlework was fine, impossibly neat. She didn't look up as he entered, her focus absolute. He stood there for a long moment, watching the small, precise movements of her hands. It was the first act of domesticity the cabin had seen in years. A quiet claim of space. A silent thank you. He said nothing. He simply took off his wet coat and hung it by the fire, accepting the gesture as it was offered. The first crack in the ice came from the child. Elias was carving a piece of pine, a habit from long, lonely nights. His hands, clumsy with an axe, were surprisingly deft with a small knife. He was carving a wolf, its head tilted back in a silent howl. Alara, sitting on the floor a few feet away, watched him, her usual impassive expression touched with a flicker of curiosity. He finished the wolf, rubbing it smooth with his thumb. Without looking at her, he placed it on the floor between them and went back to sharpening his knife. For a long time she didn't move. Then, slowly, tentatively, she crawled forward. Her small fingers brushed against the wooden wolf. She picked it up, her touch reverent. She held it in her palm, her thumb tracing the lines of its body. She looked up at him. Her lips parted. She whispered a single word, so soft it was almost lost in the crackle of the fire. Wolf Elias's hands stilled. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time not as a vessel of terror, but as a child. He gave a slow, small nod. A week later, Lena spoke to him. He was cleaning his rifle at the table. She was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of soup. The smell of herbs and rabbit filled the small space, a scent of life. "He beat me for them," she said, her voice low and steady, as if she were commenting on the weather. Elias stopped what he was doing, his hands frozen on the rifle stock. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the polished wood. "For my girls," she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I gave him 2 daughters. No sons to carry his name. No sons to inherit his dirt and his spite." She paused. The only sound the gentle bubbling of the soup. The first, Sarah. She was born with a weak heart. She lasted 1 winter, Sarah. The name was a punch to his gut. He thought of the small cross on the hill. He said it was my fault, my weakness. When Alara was born, another girl, he said I was cursed. He could hear the tremor in her voice now, the memory a physical thing. He said he would not raise another useless mouth. He was going to. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Elias finally looked up. He saw her standing there, silhouetted against the firelight, her back straight, her hands gripping the wooden spoon so tightly her knuckles were white. He saw not a victim but a survivor. A woman who had fled into a blizzard to save her last remaining child. "His name," Elias said. His voice was cold iron. "Marcus," she whispered. "His name is Marcus," he nodded slowly, committing the name to memory. He finished cleaning the rifle, the click of the parts sliding back into place unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He stood up and took a shotgun down from the pegs on the wall. He walked over to her. He held it out. "You should learn how to use this." Lena looked from the shotgun to his face. Fear warred with something else in her eyes. A flicker of resolve. She took the gun. Its weight was unfamiliar in her hands, but she did not falter. The thaw came slowly, then all at once. The world dripped. The iron grip of the frost loosened, and the ground softened into mud. The sun, a stranger for months, grew warmer. With the melting snow came the fear. Marcus would come. They both knew it. He was not a man to let his property go. The days grew longer, and so did the tension. Elias taught Lena to shoot. They would go out behind the cabin, the sharp crack of the shotgun echoing in the valley. At first, she flinched at the recoil, the noise, but she learned quickly. There was a cold fury in her that, once channeled, made her aim true. He watched her, a grim satisfaction settling in him. He was not just giving her a weapon. He was giving her back a piece of her own power. He found himself watching her at other times, too. The way she brushed Alara's hair by the fire. The quiet hum that sometimes escaped her lips as she cooked. The small, weary lines around her eyes that were slowly softening. He saw the woman she was, not just the wounds she carried. One evening Alara, who now spoke in small, careful sentences, brought him a wildflower. A purple crocus she'd found pushing through the last of the snow. She placed it on the table beside him as he ate. He looked at the fragile flower, a small, stubborn spot of color in his gray world. He looked at Alara, who gave him a shy, fleeting smile. He felt something shift inside him, a tectonic plate of grief and solitude moving for the first time in years. He cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. He knew then that this fragile piece was something he would kill to protect. The dog was the first to know. The rangy hound he kept for hunting, old and scarred as he was, lifted its head from its paws by the hearth, a low growl rumbling in its chest. Elias was on his feet in an instant, shotgun in hand. He looked at Lena. Her face was pale, all the color drained from it. She knew. She picked up Alara, holding her close, and moved to the far corner of the cabin. The shotgun he'd given her held tight in her other hand. Elias moved to the window, peering out. A lone rider was approaching, slow and deliberate. The man was tall in the saddle, dressed in clothes that were too fine for the trail. He rode as if he owned the land and everything on it. "Marcus." He dismounted, tying his horse to the fence post. He walked to the cabin with a proprietary swagger. He didn't knock. He just pushed the door open. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp way. His smile a thin, unpleasant slash on his face. His eyes scanned the room, dismissing Elias, and landed on Lena. "There you are," he said, his voice smooth oiled. "I knew you couldn't have gotten far. Silly girl. Running off like that." He took a step inside. "Come now, Lena. Gather your brat. We're going home." Lena was trembling, but her eyes held a new fire. She held Alara tighter. "We are not going anywhere with you." Marcus's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. They were cold, flat stones. "Don't be foolish. You belong to me. She belongs to me." He looked at Elias then, his gaze filled with contemptuous dismissal. "And who is this? Another stray you've picked up?" "Get out," Elias said. His voice was dangerously quiet. Marcus laughed, a short, ugly bark. "This is a family matter, old man. It has nothing to do with you." "She said she's not going," Elias said, his knuckles white on the stock of his gun. "That makes it my business." Marcus's face darkened, the charming veneer cracking to reveal the rot beneath. "I have a legal right. She is my wife. That is my child. Now step aside before you get hurt." He took another step, his hand reaching for Lena. In that instant, Elias moved. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides, his body a wall of pure force. He grabbed the front of Marcus's fine coat, slamming him back against the doorframe. The wood groaned in protest. "She is not your property," Elias snarled, his face inches from Marcus's. The words were ripped from the deepest, most wounded part of him. "She is not a curse. She is a mother who fought a blizzard to save her child. And you will not touch her again." Marcus, shocked by the sudden violence, struggled, his hand going for the pistol at his belt. But Elias was faster. He twisted, using Marcus's own momentum to throw him out of the cabin. Marcus stumbled and fell hard in the mud. He came up sputtering, his face a mask of fury, the pistol now in his hand. "You'll die for that, old man." He raised the gun. A deafening roar split the air. Not from Elias's gun. Marcus staggered back, a look of stunned surprise on his face. He looked down at his shoulder, where a red flower was blooming on his fine coat. He looked back at the cabin door. Lena stood there, smoke curling from the barrel of her shotgun, her face set like stone. Alara was behind her, her small hands clutching her mother's leg. He fired wildly, the shot splintering the doorframe next to Elias's head. Elias didn't flinch. He raised his own shotgun and fired. The blast was final. Marcus was thrown backwards, his body hitting the muddy ground with a wet thud. And then there was silence. A profound, ringing silence, broken only by the whimpering of the dog and the distant cry of a hawk. Elias stood over the body for a long moment, the smoke from his gun dissipating into the cool spring air. He turned. Lena was still standing in the doorway, the shotgun held loosely at her side. Her face was blank, her eyes wide with shock. Then, a single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. He walked to her, gently taking the gun from her hands. She let him. He looked at the wound on her husband's shoulder. Her shot, the one that had saved his life. He looked at her, and then at the small child peering out from behind her skirts. He was wounded. A sharp pain bloomed in his side where a piece of splintered wood had torn through his shirt and skin. But he barely felt it. He looked at the 2 of them, standing in the doorway of his home, framed by the light. His fortress of grief had been breached, and in its place, something new and fragile was beginning to grow. Later, after he had dealt with the body, after the sun had set, they sat by the fire. Alara was asleep on the bed, the small wooden wolf clutched in her hand. Lena was tending to the gash in his side, her touch gentle, sure. The roles were reversed. He was the wounded and she the healer. She stitched the cut with the same neat, precise stitches she used to mend his shirts. Neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. The silence between them was different now. It was not a void of fear and grief, but a shared space of quiet understanding, a comfortable weight. When she was finished, she looked up at him, her eyes clear in the firelight. "Thank you," she said. He simply nodded, the 2 words holding the weight of everything that had happened, of everything that was to come. Spring turned to summer. The world turned green and lush with life. Elias and Lena and Alara worked the land together. They planted a garden. Its neat rows a promise of a future. They mended the fences, not just the ones that marked the property line, but the broken ones inside themselves. One afternoon, Elias took them up to the hill behind the cabin. He stood before the 2 small graves. Lena stood beside him, Alara holding both of their hands. "My wife Eleanor," he said, his voice thick, "and my daughter, Sarah." Lena squeezed his hand. She did not offer empty platitudes. She simply stood with him in his sorrow, sharing its weight. They stood there for a long time as the sun dipped towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. 3 figures on a hill, a small, battered family forged in the crucible of a harsh winter. They were all scarred. They were all survivors. And as they turned to walk back to the warm, glowing light of the cabin, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was finally home.